Me begin. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm Dr. Mary Bassett. I'm the director of the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights here at Harvard. Welcome to Title 42 and human rights abuses of Haitian migrants at the Texas border. This event has a number of wonderful co-sponsors: the Center for Global Health Equity of the University of Virginia, the Cambridge Health Alliance, Asylum Program, Physicians for Human Rights, and Human Impact Partners. And we're also very pleased to offer live interpretation in Haitian Creole and Spanish today, a first for our center. So please read in the chat for instructions on how to access interpretation. This event is also being recorded and will be available on our website, fxb.harvard.edu, in the next week. We're all gathered here to discuss Title 42, a clause of the Public Health Services Law that allows for expedited removal or denied entry of people who've recently been in a country where a communicable disease was present. This expedited removal has resulted in the loss of due process for people seeking asylum and the expulsion of more than 750,000 individuals. As we've seen throughout the pandemic, and especially in recent weeks, this clause has been misused to deny entry to those seeking asylum. I was horrified and outraged to see the inhumane treatment and mass expulsion of Haitians at the US-Mexico border in Texas. It's ironic, to say the least, that people are being excluded from the United States, a country that has ongoing, uncontrolled COVID-19 transmission. For those of us who remember the exclusion of Haitian immigrants with HIV, this seems like a failure to learn from history. Title 42 is an example of the politicization of public health. It's not based in public health thinking or evidence. Public health should not be used to deny people their basic human rights or deny them the right to seek asylum. We can and we should do better. Today, you'll hear from an interdisciplinary group of experts from the legal, health, advocacy, and community spaces about abuses taking place at the border and the health impacts of this use of Title 42, as well as proposed solutions to protect people who are seeking asylum. I'd like to thank Drs. Maggie Sullivan and Laura Germanis of the FXB Center for helping to assemble this fantastic lineup of speakers for all of us to learn from today. And I also want to acknowledge a special guest, Diego Pina Lopez of Casa Alitas, an organization that serves migrant families who have left their home countries to escape violence and poverty. Casa Alitas provides hospitality and humanitarian aid, medical services, short-term shelter, and helps to reunite people with their family members in the United States. Diego is the program director of Casa Alitas Shelter for Asylum Seekers, most of whom are Central American. He's also a third-year PhD student at the Mel and Enid Zuckerman College of Public Health. He hopes to explore health disparities affecting asylum seekers in the United States. So Diego, thank you so much for joining us today. There is a great deal to cover in this hour. So without further ado, I want to ask you to join me in welcoming our moderator, Dr. Maggie Sullivan. Dr. Marie Placime was unable to join us. She's an example of why we all need to have sick leave. She's homesick today, but I know that she's here in spirit. She is herself of Haitian descent and is now one of our new Health and Human Rights Fellows at the FXB Center, where Maggie is a research fellow. So their full bios, or at least Maggie's bio, will be shown in the chat. And Maggie, thank you for filling in, and over to you.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me okay? It looks like yes, okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Bassett. We have a really great and full list of speakers today, so I'm going to very quickly introduce each of them. Please visit the events page that Veronica put in the chat to read a little bit more about their impressive work. First, we're going to hear from Noah Schramm, the project coordinator of the Florence Project's Border Action Team, which provides free legal services and critical information to migrants at the Arizona-Sonora border. Then we're going to hear from Ms. Gerline Joseph, the co-founder and executive director of the Haitian Bridge Alliance, a nonprofit organization that advocates for fair and humane immigration policies and provides migrants and immigrants with humanitarian, deportation defense, and legal and social services. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Michelle Heisler, medical director at Physicians for Human Rights and professor of internal medicine of public health at the University of Michigan. She is one of the authors of PHR's recent report, Neither Safety Nor Health: How Title 42 Expulsions Harm Health and Violates Rights. Then we'll hear from Dr. Sarah Kimball, an internist and assistant professor at Boston University School of Medicine. She directs BMC's, Boston Medical Center's Immigrant and Refugee Health Center. And finally, we will hear from Joelle Julien, a child of Haitian immigrants and a PhD candidate herself in sociocultural anthropology at UCLA. Her research interests and advocacy work lie at the intersection of racialization and migration. Noah, we'll begin with you first and hear a little bit about the background of Title 42, how it violates the rights of asylum seekers, and some of the abuses that you've seen at the border. Thank you for starting us.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And I want to say thanks to the FXB Center for hosting this event and for having me and all of us. I want to start by basically contextualizing Title 42 in the asylum process and sort of explaining at a very basic level how it works. Firstly, talking about how the asylum process should function, or at least has functioned normally in recent years. International law and domestic law on this are complicated, but relatively simple in a way. To seek asylum, you can go to a port of entry at the US-Mexico border, or at a US border, and express fear or express the intention to seek asylum. And that is normally how the process starts. You then start your way through the process. Normally you're entered into the US where you can start fighting your case. Importantly, I want to flag that also applies between ports of entry. So it's not just at ports of entry where people have the right to seek asylum, but also if they are apprehended while trying to enter clandestinely through the desert, or entering through the desert with the intention of being apprehended, they have the right to seek asylum too. So all they have to do is express fear of return or express the intention to seek asylum, and that should start the process. That's very fundamentally how it works, or how it should work at the US-Mexico border. Title 42, I'm not going to get into the public health justification. I'm going to leave it to my colleagues on this panel and others who are medical experts to dispel that. I more want to talk about how it functions, or how it has functioned during its implementation under the Trump administration and now the Biden administration. Essentially, now people who go to ports of entry and express fear of return, or express that they want to seek asylum, or do any of the things that would normally allow them to enter the process, are just told to go away. They're essentially told there is no asylum, there is no access, they need to go back to their home or wait in Mexico until there is a process. There is no hearing or review whatsoever. I can speak to this personally. I've accompanied several families at this point to ask for asylum at the Arizona ports of entry, which function the same way as ports of entry across the border. And people are provided nothing, right? No process whatsoever. There's no procedure. Title 42 essentially permits the officials to just turn people away summarily. Between the ports of entry, it is more complicated, and I think this is a point that doesn't get as much attention. There are a lot of people getting into the asylum process these days, and the reason is because of limitations on the US's ability to implement Title 42. So specifically, if someone is apprehended in US territory and expresses the desire to seek asylum, that triggers a repatriation process, right? Mexico and or the country of origin has to be willing to receive that person, which is why it's different than at the ports of entry. And so Mexico has, throughout various points at this whole process, been unwilling to accept certain populations, so certain folks from specific countries, people with like families with children that are under a certain age, and various other factors that we might not be aware of. But essentially what results is a reality where some people from certain countries effectively have access to the asylum process in the US, but they have to cross through the desert. In other words, they have to break the law in order to access the legal process. They can't get in through the ports, whereas other nationalities don't even have that option. Specifically, we've seen Mexican and Central American asylum seekers are pretty much universally turned back, whereas, for example, Venezuelans, Brazilians, some Haitians, Ecuador, and I think some Nicaraguans are at sometimes allowed to enter the asylum process, but it's very discretionary and very mysterious. And so you'll hear a lot of times that there are many people getting in to the asylum process even under Title 42, and that is the result of kind of a diplomatic posture between the US and Mexico. But importantly, there is no access to asylum at the ports of entry. There is no, I think the best way to put it is there is no legal way to access the asylum process in the US under Title 42. Since this is a public health conference, I do want to comment briefly on deaths in the desert. Especially, I work in Arizona, and our organization doesn't do humanitarian work per se, but we do encounter a lot of people who are referred by organizations that do encounter folks in the desert. If ports of entry are not letting people seek asylum under Title 42, people are desperate and people are going to try other means. In other words, Title 42 clearly directly incentivizes people to cross through the desert, which is known to be dangerous. I think a longer discussion would require us situating this in the context of prevention through deterrence and kind of the larger suite of policies that the US has implemented to try to deter asylum seekers. But I think it is very easy to argue that Title 42 is resulting in a lot of violence against asylum seekers, even if that violence is happening in the desert due to the elements or due to cartels that are operating there or what have you. I know my time is almost up, so I think the last thing I would say is that Title 42 is complicated in many ways in the way it has been implemented. And it is further complicated, in the context of the larger suite of immigration policies that the US currently has for asylum seekers. Anyone would be forgiven for being confused by it. But I think the best way perhaps to understand Title 42 is as a way for the US to artificially reduce the number of refugees that it has to deal with. And I think in that respect, it's more or less consistent with a lot of other deterrence measures. For example, the Remain in Mexico program, the Frontera del Sur programs that essentially militarizing Mexican officials to intercept asylum seekers before they even make it to the US-Mexico border, lateral expulsion flights, detention. Many policies fall into this basket of deterrence. And the problem, of course, is that people seeking asylum, the vast majority are genuinely fleeing for their lives. And organizations that work on the border can attest to this. This is particularly true in the case of Haitian asylum seekers. And the question I want to end on is, what does it mean for us, the US, to be implementing these brutal deterrence measures against people with valid protection claims? And what does that say about us? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noah. We'll now turn to Ms. Gerline Joseph to hear about community advocacy among the Haitian community against Title 42. Welcome, Gerline.
Good morning, Maggie. Thank you so much for the FXB Center for having us. Thank you, Noah, for setting up the stage so people really understand exactly what we are dealing with when it comes to Title 42. And I just want to start by saying that Title 42, we started fighting against it in April 2022, when the Biden administration started using it to expel people. And we realized at that time, a lot of people within the community, Haitians and other Black migrants from Cameroon, were being detained and expelled under Title 42. So in April of 2022, we sent the first letter asking then President Trump to end Title 42 and stop expulsions of people under the false pretense of Title 42. If you heard from Noah, Title 42 has no bearing upon people seeking protection at the US-Mexico border, but is being used as a trap to literally deter and destroy the lives of the most vulnerable. Earlier this year, we released the report, The Invisible Wall, and explicitly state how Title 42 have been used as a way to clearly eliminate every single avenue for people seeking asylum at the US-Mexico border. Unfortunately, we see that the Biden administration continues the same cruel, inhuman, draconian program such as Title 42 to really block every person's from accessing the in September. And what we have been fighting to let people know, this is not new. This is not lost on our community, specifically the Black asylum seekers, specifically the Haitian asylum seekers, as we have seen from history. And as Dr. Bassett mentioned earlier, how back in the 1970s, 1980s, again, health code, quote unquote, were used to bar Haitians from accessing the system to get protection, as we saw when they were literally fleeing Haiti as a result of US-backed policies in the country. And we saw also the majority of the people from Haiti and other majority Black countries, the fact that they do not have protection in any place, no matter where they find themselves during the journey, deadly journey, I must add, to come to ask for asylum. So we continue to ask President Biden, the Vice President Harris, and Secretary Mayorkas to stop using Title 42 as a ruse to destroy the lives of those people. To date, today, as I speak to you, there were 81 flights, 81 deportation and expulsion flights sent to Haiti within the last month and a half. That's close to 9,000 people that were deported and expelled to Haiti, as we all know, in the middle of all the turmoil, the kidnapping, the violence, the political instability, following by the earthquake, following by the storm that has completely destroyed the entire southern side of the country. Now, my question has always been to the administration, whether it was the previous one or this one, if we are talking about Title 42 and we are seeing and we are saying that, yes, we are using it because of the COVID-19, there are a couple of things we need to really look into. Are we testing those people to make sure that they are safe and healthy? And if they are tested negative for COVID-19, then why are they being expelled? Why are they being deported? Because they clearly do not provide any type of health problems because they do not have COVID-19. So if they do not have COVID-19, they should be released to be able to continue their cases. Let's say that they tested positive. Our policies are to quarantine a person who is tested positive for COVID-19 until they are tested negative and be released. So if this is happening, therefore, all those people should be released to be able to continue their cases and get access to protection. Let's say they're not testing people. Therefore, we are voluntarily, as a country, exporting COVID-19 to a country like Haiti that literally has 129 beds that is equipped to support people with COVID-19. So either way, when we really look into what Title 42 is and what it's being used for, it is unacceptable. And as of we see today, yesterday, we have opened the borders to non-essential travelers. So therefore, if non-essential travelers is not cause for alarm for COVID-19, the population who are in search of protection should also be allowed due process to be able to access the system and get protection. We will continue to fight against Title 42. We will continue to fight against the deportations of Haitians and all other people who are seeking asylum. I'm seeing that we are running out of time, but but we just wanted to share that ending deportation under Title 42 as a rules must be ended immediately. And as President Biden and his administration know, we are not going to give up until Title 42 is rescinded, until deportations are stopped and due process is provided to all people in search of asylum. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Guerline, especially for pointing out some of those inconsistencies. We'll now turn to Dr. Michelle Heisler to hear about Physicians for Human Rights reports on the harms of Title 42.
Yes, thank you. And it's an honor to be among these remarkable panelists and here at the FXB Center. This June, as Maggie noted, we at Physicians for Human Rights conducted in-person interviews and psychological evaluations of 28 asylum seekers who had been expelled through Title 42 and are now, were then in Mexican border cities. I'll put the link of the full report in the chat, but I want to let me just put this in the chat for you. I don't know if I did that. Okay, yeah. So, but I want to just touch on some pieces of what these asylum seekers experienced. All of those we interviewed were denied, as Noah noted earlier, all of them were denied any opportunity to present asylum claims. All but one reported feeling unsafe in Mexico. None had access to state protection from Mexican authorities. And in fact, several had been robbed or extorted by Mexican authorities. All the asylum seekers we interviewed described cruel and inhumane treatment at the hands of US border officials. These included physical and verbal abuse, inhumane detention conditions before being expelled. 16 interviewees reported not receiving any information at all related to their expulsion, and 10 reported being intentionally deceived by immigration officials about what was going to happen to them. In some cases being told they were being transferred to another US state, but then being left in the middle of the night in a Mexican city they had never been to before. Even more cruelly, US officials deceived people about being reunited with family members, while in reality they were separating them. It's important to stress that families are continuing to be separated by Title 42 under the Biden administration. Some family members have been permitted to enter the United States, while others traveling together were expelled. Of those we interviewed, 11 parents were forcibly separated from their biological children by border officials. A further 8 were separated from family members they were traveling with, who were not their biological children, but they were the primary guardians, such as younger minor siblings or nieces and nephews. These separations took place without any consideration of the needs or vulnerabilities of family members or the age of the children. The harrowing accounts of those we interviewed really echo those of other human rights organizations. Just this past month, Human Rights First documented at least 7,647 kidnappings and other attacks on people blocked or expelled under Title 42 since President Biden took office. As a health and human rights organization, we examined in depth the psychological effects of these expulsions and family separations, and found these effects to be profound. We administered to 26 interviewees well-validated screening tools for depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Of these 26 individuals, 25 screened positive for at least 2 of these mental conditions, and 23 screened positive for all of them, PTSD, anxiety, and depression. Many of those we interviewed had indeed experienced traumatic events in their home countries, but it was striking how many people described the onset of severe psychological symptoms only after the expulsion. This was especially the case among those who had been separated from family members, with some gaining entry and others being expelled. 11 interviewees stated that since the expulsion that led to family separation, their children were not eating and had lost significant weight. One mother, for example, told us about her son who had gained entry to the US and is there now, and her toddler daughter who is with her in Mexico. She said, she told us that my son told me, I don't want to be here without you anymore. I would rather kill myself. She went on to explain that we had never been separated before. He calls me crying, telling me that he wants me to take his sister to him. My toddler also wakes up at night looking and asking for her brother. She has also lost a lot of weight. Before leaving my country about 2 months ago, she weighed 27 pounds, and right now she weighs 19 pounds. A father also reported the onset of psychological trauma among his children due to treatment by US border officials during their expulsion. He noted, we were very traumatized because we were treated very poorly, even though we just had a desire to find freedom. My children are sad and very stressed out. They cannot sleep and they wake up screaming and crying. My daughter has heart palpitations now. They had never seen a weapon before, much less one pointed at their dad. People described an impossible situation. They were unsafe in their own country, unsafe in Mexico, and yet unable to seek safety at the US border. As Ms. Joseph described, and we and other public health experts have repeatedly outlined, detailed recommendations on effective and evidence-based public health measures for the US government to safely process families, children, and adults at the border. These measures must be implemented urgently. Every day that the Title 42 order continues to expel asylum seekers is another day that the US government is directly harming people's health and violating their human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Heisler. We'll now turn to Dr. Sarah Kimball to hear about the healthcare needs and her experiences in practicing with recent Haitian immigrants at the Safety Net Hospital where she works.
Thank you so much, Maggie. So as was mentioned, my lens in this discussion is that in our center at the Immigrant Refugee Health Center at BMC, we are one of the receiving sites for new arrivals. And we have been seeing Haitian patients for many, many years, but there's been a tremendous difference in what we've been seeing over the last 6 months even. And so as was mentioned earlier by Noah, many people are turned away at the border, but what we have been seeing is that there are still people who make it through, often via a stay in detention, and they're being pushed into more and more unsafe pathways of getting here. So one of the many changes that we've been noticing in our clinic is that no one anymore comes to a port of entry. They all have tremendously dangerous and traumatizing journeys to get here. So around April in our clinic, we started seeing a huge uptick in Haitian patients who were showing up at our clinic, many of whom were pregnant or families with young children, and many of whom were released from detention to Boston. And they would show up at our clinic without having much in the way of previous medical care. And in the case of our pregnant patients, almost no prenatal care. So as has been mentioned, from a health perspective, there's a huge disconnect between the stated value of protecting public health from COVID and the ways that the US government is enacting Title 42. And as a primary care doctor, what breaks my heart about that is that my patients, they tell me, they show me with their symptoms that they are painfully aware of this hypocrisy. From a trauma perspective, capricious systems, random systems are re-traumatizing. They are psychologically cruel, especially when you are treating a patient population that has experienced a tremendous amount of trauma. So knowing that the patients who make it to Boston are only a small subset and that many people are turned away, what I want to add is just some of the medical consequences that we are seeing on the ground for the people who do have to go through a harrowing border crisis and do make it here. So most importantly, we are seeing, as I mentioned, that many people are not getting medical care, and this is particularly concerning for both young children, but also for pregnant women when they are crossing or when they are in detention. And so many of the women who've been released to get prenatal care with us have had either very little in the way of screening, and we've had at least one patient who had avoidable medical complications. She ended up hospitalized and having an early delivery and having to be separated from her baby. And for a medical reason that was truly avoidable had they been able to access medical care and prenatal care earlier. As was mentioned, the journey that people are telling us that they are taking is incredibly medically risky. We talk to people who report symptoms that sound very clearly like heat stroke or dehydration. And again, when you're doing that with a small child or with a pregnant family member, that compounds the risk of that journey. We know that when we take away the formal pathways that people use to seek asylum, that deterrence, as was mentioned at the beginning, it doesn't work. It just forces people into more and more risky pathways. And so from a medical perspective, when we think about harm reduction, when we think about how do we cause the least amount of harm, all we're doing is basically pushing people into more and more risky pathways of getting here. The issue of family separation was brought up previously. People are separated both at the border, but I will say that also for many of our patients who have been here for many years, who are Haitian, it can bring up again symptoms of trauma and fear that they won't be able to reunify with their family. So the issue of family separation is really not just an issue at the border. It extends into the entire community. A small piece that we have been seeing that sounds bureaucratic, but it's actually deeply important, is that many of the people who've been arriving actually do not have complete immigration paperwork. So they're given pieces of paper and told they have to see immigration once they get to Boston. The system at the border is so overwhelmed that by doing this, by giving people incomplete paperwork, they basically get here and they're not able to get access to benefits like Mass Health or Mass Health Limited or even shelter systems. And so the overwhelm at the border has these kind of radiating effects for what people can access and the kind of services that we know help them get and stay healthy. The last piece that I just want to hone in a little bit more on is the burden of trauma, and particularly both from crossing the border, but also from the moral injury that we are enacting on people. So I have had many patients, just like my previous colleagues mentioned, who have said that they left Haiti many years ago, went through working in many informal sectors, have been in very difficult conditions, but that it's the journey between Mexico and the US that was the most traumatizing element in their entire history. I had a patient 2 weeks ago who told me that he is still having flashbacks and nightmares, not from his difficult situations previously, but because of the bodies he saw along the way, because he saw violence, because he witnessed terribly unsafe situations trying to get here. So I will just end by naming that we really think about this in medicine. We talk about quality improvement and how every system is designed to get the results it gets. And while Title 42 is a new flavor on deportation and restricting people, it really is a continuation of what I think of as a racialized and discriminatory deportation system. So we are basically deporting mostly Black and brown people. If you look at our time in our country since 1896, we have forced nearly 50 million people out of this country. 90% of those have been non-white. 96% today of the people we're deporting are non-white. And so this is what causes the moral injury to our patients. The psychological consequences of this kind of moral injury are tremendous for the individuals we're seeing, but also for the entire community. Our Haitian colleagues and friends who are here living here know that this is happening within their communities. And so that's what we're hearing from our patients every day. Even the ones who get here are having tremendous harm from these policies. So I'll pause there for now and happy to take questions later.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We'll now turn and finish with Joelle to hear about individual experiences of Haitian migrants. Thank you, Joelle.
Thank you. Thank you, organizers, for inviting me to this panel, and thank you, fellow panelists, for your important insights. Just to give you all a little more background on myself, I am Haitian American and lived in Haiti from 2013 to 2016, and since 2017 have been conducting ethnographic research with Haitian migrants throughout the Americas, including Chile, Brazil, Mexico, and the US, with a particular focus on how Haitian migrants are experiencing anti-Black immigration policies across transnational contexts. Through this research, I've come to understand Title 42 as just one instance in a set of openly white supremacist policies that are on the rise throughout the Americas. These policies, in relation to the movement of Haitian people, can also be understood as a concerted and enduring effort to dehumanize Haitian people. This includes policies like the 2013 Dominican Republic ruling that revoked Dominican citizenship from people of Haitian descent, Brazil's 2012 quota system for Haitian migrants, the 2016 Chilean government-sponsored voluntary repatriation flights to Haiti, as well as several others. Today, I would like us to consider not only how Title 42 has impacted the individual Haitian migrants at the US-Mexico border, but also how the effects of a set of interrelated policies have far-reaching consequences and reverberate in Haitian families and communities throughout the Americas. From 2013 to 2016, while I was living in a remote area of Haiti, I witnessed a vast number of young adults from the community emigrating to Brazil and Chile, pour chercher la vie, or search for life, a safe and productive life that for various reasons, including US meddling in Haitian affairs, were denied at home. One of these community members, Louise, which is a pseudonym, who had a husband already living abroad, made the difficult decision to leave her 2 young daughters behind to join her partner in Chile. She hoped that the separation from her children would be temporary and that within a couple of years, she and her husband would save enough money to be reunited with their children in Chile. Though life in Chile was exceptionally difficult, they faced blatant anti-Black racism in every sector of life, from work, housing, and public services. By late 2019, they had enough money for 2 flights. Their children had Haitian passports, and they were in the process of applying for family reunification visas. In March 2020, as the world came to a screeching halt, so did their hope to be reunited with their children when Chile closed their borders to this sort of family reunification. On the other hand, immediate family members of nationals, not permanent residents, were exempted from the Chilean entry ban due to COVID. After a year of waiting, they made another difficult decision, and in June 2021 decided to make the perilous 7,000-mile journey across South and Central America to the US, or to the Mexico border in the hopes of finding a safe and productive life and another chance of family reunification. Their plan at the outset of the journey was to seek asylum in Mexico and to remain there until they received a legal status that qualified them to apply for family reunification. Though the US, where they have family, was a destination that they had in mind, they understood that they would not have a legal pathway to family reunification if they made it to the US and on the off chance were not deported. They understood that they probably would not be successful in an asylum claim if they were granted, or an asylum claim, and if they happened to be granted temporary protected status, the status would not allow for family reunification. From the moment they arrived in Mexico, however, it became clear that Mexico would not provide the safe and productive life that they had been seeking since leaving Haiti. In Tapachula, at the southern border of Mexico with Guatemala, they were in constant fear of increasingly violent Mexican immigration officials. And to make matters worse, Tapachula had become, in effect, an open-air prison for migrants. Due to the urging of the US government to deter migrants from the US-Mexico border, the Mexican government's policy forced migrants to remain in Tapachula for an undetermined amount of time as their asylum cases were being processed. The almost secretive and windy process, which had to be initiated online at the time of their arrival, which made it even much more difficult, was confusing to navigate, especially in Spanish, with no Creole translation. They remained in Tapachula for several weeks, waiting for their first appointment with Mexican immigration officials. And during this time, they were not allowed to work, could not find consistent and safe housing, and were hearing rumors that it could take months and even years until they would receive the documentation necessary not only to leave Tapachula, but also to be able to work and make a living. Again, they were forced to make a difficult decision. Early morning on September 24th, I received a panicked phone call from their eldest daughter that her parents were under a bridge in Texas and she was afraid that they would be deported. She made her fear clear. For all of the misery that her parents went through in Haiti, and especially through the dangerous and expensive journey from Chile to the US, she would prefer them to seek asylum in the US than be reunited with her and her sister in Haiti due to deportation. Ultimately, after spending the weekend under the bridge with little food and water and the dying cell phone battery, Louise and her husband were apprehended by immigration officials, detained for a day, and released to their family in Florida. Louise, who is pregnant, and her husband were not one of the unlucky thousands who were unlawfully deported without the chance to seek asylum. However, the dream that set off their journey to be reunited with their children and to find a safe and productive life is in limbo still. They have reached the promised land where human rights, mental health, and public health are heralded as priorities in the society, and yet they and their children are haunted with the trauma of separation, of the journey, and the constant fear of deportation. Though Louise and her husband were not deported under Title 42, their status in the US is unclear. They received notice to appear at their local ICE office within 60 days of their release from detention, but their earliest appointment available is in 2023. In the meantime, they are not able to work, and it is unclear what sort of social services, if any at all, they will qualify for. They are still separated from their children and have no idea of when they will be together again. Louise's,
Joelle,
oops, sorry.
my apologies. I'm wanting just to thank you so much for sharing what you have been able to share about the stories of individuals that you've been working with and bringing to light. I think a lot of situations that we're protected from hearing and wouldn't otherwise know about. So thank you for bringing that to us. I'd like to open up and transition to the discussion part of today's event for to allow as many questions when we have some coming through already in the discussion chat. But first, I'd like to give the opportunity to our special guest, Diego, to begin with a reflection or a question to our panel.
Well, first, I want to say thank you for FXB for having me here, as well as these amazing panelists. It's always so humbling and tough to think about the journeys that the families are coming through to the US border, especially as we see, and we've seen the experience of the Haitians coming through and I don't even know if I would call them living situations, the environments that we put other people through and the travesties, not only throughout this pandemic, but historically throughout our history, our recent history with the border. My question goes with, I know we're looking at the Justice Welcome with Dignity campaign coming up, and I would like to also know what additional action items would you all like to see the participants or the attendees come through with outside of just that? What additional action items can they do in their communities, in their schools, and so forth?
Thanks, Diego. And that can go to any one of the panelists here in terms of next steps and what can we do, what can be done about Title 42. It looks like Noah, go ahead, you have your hand up.
Thank you for the question, Diego. Nice to see you. And I think that also goes into a question that came up in the chat of how do we end Title 42, which I think is a great question, one we've been reckoning with all year. There has been, obviously the Biden administration can end it tomorrow. It's purely executive. They don't need Congress to fix it. And as a result, a lot of the advocacy efforts have been placed directly on the executive branch. Unfortunately, that hasn't been effective. So what I would say, and I would be eager to hear what others think, would be, to raise congressional attention on this issue, not necessarily for a legislative solution, but rather just to bring more publicity. I think people don't know what Title 42 is. People don't know what's happening at the border. They have maybe a vague idea super vague about what asylum seekers go through and how Title 42 applies if they know what it is at all. But I think the biggest problem is that the Biden administration just isn't feeling any pressure on this issue. And so I would be eager to see members of Congress, probably Democrats, come out more in coalition, right, coming out more in support. And so in terms of what you can do in your community, I think just calling your representative and telling them this is an issue that you care about.
Absolutely, I agree with Noah, and thank you for the question. And we must continue to push President Biden to stop Title 42. He has the power to do that, especially now that we have opened our borders to non-essential travelers. There is absolutely no excuse as to why people must continue to suffer and die as a result of Title 42. So yes, call your congressional members, but also call President Biden directly, send letters, call the Vice President, call Secretary Mayorkas, Ron Klein, Susan Rice. They are the ones upholding this cruel policy that has no bearing on the health issue that we are dealing with right now. So we are calling the community to join us in signing letters, making the calls, and forcing the administration to immediately stop Title 42 and end all deportation and expulsion under the false pretense of the health care that we are dealing with right now.
Thank you so much, Gerline. And I know I have some links and language from the Welcome with Dignity Act. They've provided actually for those of us, especially who are not familiar with picking up the phone and calling legislators or participating in action days. They have a lot of prepared material, simple top messaging lines. You can sign up for the virtual advocacy days, and I'll put that in the chat. I wanted to move to another question that we had earlier in during the panel, and there was an individual asking about a situation in which it's not uncommon to have clients or patients have had their medications removed from them at the border or shoelaces removed from their shoes at the border. And I'm wondering if anyone on the panel can speak to the legality of that.
I can answer that question. I don't want to take up too much space. But essentially it could be. CBP has specific guidance on how to deal with medication for folks in processing, and ICE has similar guidance. I will note that ICE is often releasing detainees, like people who are formerly in detention centers, into communities, and they have requirements saying that they have to release people with adequate medical supplies. They often do not comply with that, and we're currently fighting with them on it. But I don't think CBP has similar guidance for Title 42 expulsions. And in many cases, we're just talking about people who are very briefly taken into CBP custody and immediately expelled either right there at the port or at another place along the border. And I don't think they have requirements to release people with adequate medical supplies. And of course, the larger issue there is they're not actually being processed, right? They're just being sent back. So.
And I want to add, that's one of the most painful reports we've had from many folks. I can share one story of a family, little girl, she was about 3 years old and she had a lollipop, and they took it from her and threw it in the trash in front of her. So the confiscating or taking the belongings of the people is simply an extra layer of dehumanize and really make them know that they are unwelcome, they are unwanted. And people have reached out to us asking, how can we get our belongings, because everything is taken from them, and many of time they witness them throwing them in the trash in front of them. So the cruelty that is being inflicted upon another human being at the US-Mexico border by CBP or ICE officers is extremely painful, but this is the realities that people are dealing with. So I wanted to share that. It was so painful for me personally when the little girl was crying and her parents could do nothing to just keep a lollipop from being thrown in the trash for absolutely no reason.
Thank you, Gerline. Dr. Bassett, you have your hand up.
There I am unmuted. Thanks. And let me lower my hand. I may have missed this, but it occurs to me that now that we have open access for fully vaccinated people and we have acknowledged horrendous inequities in vaccine access in many parts of the world, that vaccinating people at the border would be a really good way to address this. And then at least, you know, they would meet the standard for people being able to enter the country. And of course, to make an asylum claim, as well as the US would show its commitment to extending vaccine coverage. I know that's somewhat of a rhetorical question, but maybe it's a comment.
I don't know if anybody would like to field that, or we can let it stand as a comment. We do have a question in our queue. What role does the Haitian diaspora play, or can they play, in advocating for the current administration to stop using Title 42? I don't know if Gerline, if you're there, you go.
Yeah, I mean, the Haitian diaspora has been active, I'll say mostly active after what happened in the Rio. This is an issue we've been dealing with for the past, since 2015 really, so 3 presidents now. But I think after seeing what happened in the Rio, the Haitian community clearly understand what needs to be done right now. There have been a lot of activations and actions throughout the country, from Miami to New York to Boston and other places, really pushing for the administration to stop Title 42. We also have the Haitian American elected official group, NEON, under the leadership of Councilman Alex Desulme, who is also pushing for the administration to end Title 42. But of course, we need more people involved, more people to push, and more people to ask for justice for those who are at the US-Mexico border. And I want to highlight that when we are pushing, we are not pushing just for Haitians and other Black migrants, but for all people who find themselves fleeing home due to persecution, political turmoil, natural disasters, and so on and so forth, to make sure that all people are welcome with dignity and getting access to due process. But the Haitian community, you know, we never give up. We'll continue to push as leaders in the fight for freedom and liberation for all people.
Thank you so much, Gerline. We may have time for a final question. How can maternal health and mental health care strengthen trauma-informed care to emphasize xenophobia and anti-Blackness and racism as the core determinants of adverse health for migrants? Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm so grateful for this question. I think it's really critical to one of the things that we often miss when we talk about immigrant and refugee health. It's a huge misnomer that we talk about the trauma people endured before they got here, and we never focus on experiences of racism and discrimination and violence that we evoke and invoke on people's lives when they get here. What we have been doing within our own organization is directly working with consultants around anti-racist organizational practices, which, exactly as your question reflects, have a huge overlap with trauma-informed services. And thinking about how does our mental health, our maternal health care, our primary care, all of the services that we provide adequately reflect the fact that there are pre-migration experiences of trauma, there are during migration experiences of trauma, and unfortunately, there are also post-migration experiences that continue to harm people. This is an area of a huge interest for our group, and something that if there's anyone here who's interested in talking further in the future, I'm happy to go into.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We have a question about Title 42 in particular that I'm not sure, Noah, if you'd be prepared to answer this, but there's a comment that Title 42 has been in US law since 1944. Has it been invoked and or abused in the past? And this is a great question that historically contextualizes what is happening right now. And I'm not sure if anybody on the panel would like to briefly respond to that.
I would not be able to respond to that. My impression is that it was perhaps invoked once before, but I don't know the context. I'd be curious to hear from others.
No, I'm seeing some head shaking. That's something that we can all look into. I think it's a provocative question. It's certainly not the first time that public health reasons or quote unquote public health reasons have been invoked to limit migration and especially Black and brown migrants at the border. And so that is not new. But in terms of the specific Title 42 clause, I'm not sure. All right. Before wrapping up, I think partly of just wanting to hear more and more from the panelists rather than my own conclusion. There's a question to Joelle and about and asking, when do you assess true motives for Title 42, and how is it that your organization and what are other organizations that we're working with doing to effectively address the root causes of dehumanizing treatments of Haitians and other Black and brown populations?
Sorry,
I don't know if
can you kind of start the question? I didn't hear the beginning. I'm sorry.
I apologize. It was saying that that you addressed in your presentation and the consensus here that public health is a ruse for Title 42. What then do you all assess? And so I think this is for other folks in the panel as well, as the true motives for Title 42, and how is it that your organizations are working to address root causes of the dehumanizing treatment of Haitians and other Black and brown populations? And so that can be addressed whether by Sarah or Michelle, if you want to have the final word.
I don't know if you have Joelle. Joelle, are you there?
Yeah, I can kind of speak a little bit about just the history of Haitian migration and the fact that there has been a historical precedent for the US finding various reasons that might not reflect the reality to keep out Haitian folks. So if it's, again, during the AIDS crisis or let's see, after natural disasters. So I think looking at the historical precedent and seeing what's happening now, that is where I'm seeing this idea of this Title 42 being used to keep out Black and brown bodies from the US. It's not new.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joelle, for that context. And we're closing into the end of our hour. I want to thank all of our panelists and our guest speaker and to everyone who joined today. We hope that this interdisciplinary panel has helped to clarify Title 42, its health impacts, and the role in human rights abuses at the border that it has. You're invited to join in the upcoming virtual days of action hosted by Welcome with Dignity that are happening on November 17th through the 19th. And those are to urge your members of Congress to call on the Biden administration to restore access to asylum for people who are seeking safety and to end policies that are harming people seeking asylum at our border, like Title 42. The registration for virtual advocacy days has been posted in the chat. You're also welcome to visit the Welcome with Dignity website, and they have some helpful links in terms of additional actions that you can take at your local level and organizations for supporting. And so that concludes today our panel, and thank you so much again to everybody who came and helping us to understand more about what we can do as individuals to end policies like Title 42.